You're listening to the Chapter a Day Bible Study. I'm John Stange, and today we're in Judges 7. Gideon defeats Midian. Judges 7 is a chapter in the Old Testament that really stands out because it tells the story of Gideon and his army facing the overwhelming forces of Midian. And humanly speaking, Israel didn't stand a chance. And yet God intentionally reduced Israel's strength so that everyone would know that the victory belonged to him alone. This chapter reminds us that God's power is most clearly displayed when our own strength runs out. It also points us forward to Jesus, who accomplished the greatest victory through what appeared to be weakness. The chapter begins with Gideon and his army preparing for battle. Gideon had gathered 32,000 men to fight the Midianites, but God declared that that army was too large. The Lord knew that if Israel won with a force like that, they might mistakenly believe that they had saved themselves. And so God told Gideon in verse 2, "The people with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel boast over me, saying, 'My own hand has saved me.'" This verse reveals one of the major themes of the chapter. God isn't just interested in giving his people victory, he wants them to understand where that victory comes from. Pride is always a danger for God's people. We often want to take credit for blessings that have come directly from the Lord's hand. So God first instructed Gideon to send home anyone who was afraid, and 22,000 men departed, leaving only 10,000. But even then, God said the army was still too large. Next, God brought the men to the water for a rather unique test. Some drank by kneeling down, and others lapped the water with their hands, and the Lord selected only 300 men to remain with Gideon, the men who lapped the water. The other 9,700 were sent home. Now imagine how Gideon must have felt in that moment. The Midianite army was enormous. Judges 7:12 describes them as numerous as locusts, with camels beyond counting. And yet God reduced Israel's army from 32,000 to just 300 men. From a military perspective, that situation looked hopeless, but from God's perspective, it was exactly where he wanted it. I think many of us can relate to Gideon's situation here. There are seasons when our resources seem completely inadequate. We may feel outnumbered by challenges or responsibilities or financial pressures or even health concerns or even something like ministry opportunities. We look at what we have and we conclude that it isn't enough. But God often works through what appears insufficient. He delights in displaying his power through weak vessels. He frequently places his people in situations where success can't be explained apart from his intervention. Even after receiving God's promises, Gideon still struggled with fear. The Lord graciously addressed that fear by giving him an opportunity to hear what was happening in the enemy camp. And so that night, Gideon quietly approached the Midianite camp, and he overheard a soldier describing a dream. The dream involved a loaf of barley bread tumbling into the camp and overturning a tent, and another soldier immediately interpreted it. In verse 14 we read, "This is no other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. God has given into his hand Midian and all the camp." What a remarkable encouragement that must have been. God allowed Gideon to hear the enemy's own acknowledgement that defeat was coming. And I think Gideon's response is rather instructive because in verse 15 it says this, "As soon as Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he worshiped." So that means before the battle was won, Gideon worshiped. Before seeing the outcome, he praised God. He recognized that the Lord had already secured the victory. Well, that's an important lesson for us as well. Because worship isn't just a response to God's blessings after they arrive. It's also an expression of faith in God's promises before we see their fulfillment. Well, the battle itself unfolded in an unexpected way. Gideon's 300 men carried trumpets, empty jars, and torches. And at Gideon's signal, they surrounded the camp, blew their trumpets, broke the jars, revealed the torches, and then shouted, what we see in verse 20, they said, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The Midianites were then thrown into confusion, and in the darkness and in the chaos, they turned their swords against one another and fled. The Lord gave Israel a miraculous victory. But notice how little emphasis is placed on the military skill of Gideon's men. The chapter consistently highlights God's intervention. The victory belonged to the Lord. And this is where Judges 7 points us toward Jesus in a very helpful way. Like Gideon's army, God's plan of salvation doesn't follow human expectations. If we were designing a rescue plan for humanity, we might look for strength or power or wealth or military might, but instead, God sent his Son in humility. Jesus was born in a manger. He was raised in an ordinary family, and he was rejected by many of his own people. When he went to the cross, it appeared that he had been defeated, and yet through his death and resurrection, he accomplished the greatest victory in history. The Apostle Paul later explained this principle when he wrote that God chooses what is weak in the world to shame the strong. The cross appeared to be weak, but it became the means through which sin, death, and Satan were defeated. Gideon's 300 men couldn't boast in their own strength. And likewise, no believer can boast in earning salvation. We are saved entirely by God's grace through faith in Christ. So that glory belongs to him alone. Judges 7 also reminds us that Jesus is the ultimate deliverer. Gideon rescued Israel temporarily from Midianite oppression, but Jesus provides eternal deliverance. Gideon's victory lasted for a season. Christ's victory lasts forever. When we face challenges that seem impossible, Judges 7 encourages us to remember who our God really is. He isn't limited by our weaknesses, our lack of resources, or even our circumstances. In fact, those are often the very places where his power shines most clearly. The Lord who gave victory through Gideon's 300 men is the same Lord who secured salvation through Jesus Christ. Our confidence isn't found in our strength. It's found in his. And because Christ has already won the ultimate victory, we can trust him with every battle we face today. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Chapter a Day Bible Study. For more resources to help you in your walk with Christ and your understanding of the Bible, please visit my website at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com. And if you'd like to partner with me by becoming a supporter of this ministry, you'll see a few options to do so, again, at BibleStudyHeadquarters.com or in the description of this episode. As always, thank you for your prayers, thank you for your support, and thank you for your willingness to share this content with others. Have a great day, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.